Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and deceased. My name is Emily Sophia, and I'm going to be breaking down for you guys this week the newest episode of The Walking Dead's 5th season, Slabtown. So, spoiler alert before we dive into the mad thick of things, as I will be bearing all in this review. And without further ado, let us get into the nit and the grit, okay? So, it's always really intimidating for me as a reviewer of television when a show produces an episode that kind of really steers clear the normal path. You know, I have a typical sort of approach to most episodes of The Walking Dead and how things typically go when we've got, you know, the group storylines, and we saw this occur in the 4th season, like with the wanderings of the errant wayward governor. These character-centric episodes that are really depthy and interesting in terms of the kinds of messages that they portray, the way that they develop these singular characters, the statements that they make about this apocalyptic world where it seems like everything that could be said about this crazy universe going to hell has been said. But then there's something new that enters the fray, and we really got to see that this week with the story of Beth at the hospital. And oh man, what a fascinating and disturbing and very unnerving episode. I was like, you know, sitting down on my couch watching this episode, I was shaking in my shins, like, and that's when I know it's bad for me, because that indicates to me that every fiber of my being is clenched. I clench from the soul to the mind to the rest of me. So once I've reached that 3rd level, I know that I'm pretty much clinical case. And I have to commend the writers for really endearing the character of Beth to us as the audience, because that was not always the case. There were quite a few people who I did not find very tasteful in the 2nd season of the show. One of those being Beth, who began as a very weak character, and I remember being furious at her when she locked herself in the bathroom and slit her wrists, and I was like, dear God, woman, do you not see anything beyond yourself in this situation? And then we see her come forth brilliantly from that place of despair and self-implosion to becoming a full-fledged part of the group, even after the fall of the prison in her moving around with Daryl and learning survival skills and opening up about herself to Daryl, and it was that through that relationship we really got to see this very deeply human and strong part of her. And also at the prison as well, she was always the one who had a song in her heart and on her lips, you know? She was always that type, and I just appreciate now that I can appreciate her as a character because I did not from the get-go. So bringing her to a new fruition has just been so satisfying to see, because I don't know how I would have survived this episode if I didn't feel like I was freaking rooting for her. And trust me, the pom-poms were waving on my part. So let us first talk about this whole institution that Beth gets wrangled into. Although I must also say, I was really frustrated about the previews for this week's episode because they used a scene that is going to, I'm guessing, be a part of an episode 2 weeks out. They used that scene to preview this episode, i.e. the part where Daryl is talking about how they saw Beth or whatever, like he's talking to someone about what they experienced in the Slabtown. And so I was expecting that. There was like this freaking 5-minute commercial break of doom, and I had my remote, I had the commercials muted because my mind was buzzing and I could not handle reality in that time. And so I had my remote like this and just like, we have 3 freaking minutes to find out exactly what's gonna go down, and then of course it's a huge cliffhanger. Basically this episode is a 2-parter, but it looks like next week we're gonna be with Abraham and company, and that's not going to not be interesting, but talk about emotional constipation. The bowels of my heart are going to be a little uncomfortable for the upcoming 14 days. And I imagine that some of you might be with me in that. But anyway, so let us talk about this institution and this form of survival. My favorite quote from the episode was one that was spoken by Dr. Stephen Edwards about how it's in this place that Beth is taken into. It's not about survival, it's about transcendence, okay? So, see, here's how I do the math in my mind. Now, when we look at Rick's group and when everybody got back together at the beginning of the season, remember how Michonne was telling Rick that she doesn't miss what was before all of this went down. She doesn't miss that past. She clings to the present in the community that she has now, and just that experience of togetherness and being where they're at long last, you know? And then, so for them, this road of survival, what we would call survival, they are able to thrive in that. I mean, even between the tragedies, you know? So we got thrive, or let me put it this way. Survive rhymes with thrive. Transcend rhymes with end of your life and happiness, okay? You know? They just gotta make the rhymes and they can figure it out and switch things up. But no, instead we have this crazy and abusive system of forced indentured servitude, essentially, wherein people are introduced into a system, and whether they want to be a part of it or not, are automatically indebted to their saviors / captors who insist upon whatever you take from the system, you give back. And because they are rescued, possibly against their will, there's talk of Beth's capture being a conspiracy, and that perhaps the horde of walkers in which she was lost, where she was separated from Daryl, was perhaps instigated by actual humans and thus conspiracy. Anyways, so they're forced into this place. Whether they're not asked, like, okay, do you want to stay here and exchange services? No, they are told, or Beth is told when she first comes to and realizes that Dodo, we're not in Kansas anymore, she realizes that there is no choice here. And it's a really ridiculously scary thing. The character of Officer Dawn Lerner, I believe her name is, she can be compared to a lot of, well, at least 3 major characters in the show. To Rick, of course, to Abraham, and also to the governor, of course, because just as the governor was the captain of the ship named Woodbury, she is the captain of the vessel of Slabtown, which is essentially this system of transcendence, wherein some semblance of a society, of a social structure is created. And no matter how much people are suffering psychologically and physically and emotionally in this place, all that matters is that there is this sort of cannon fodder that is directed into their institution. But instead of people simply dying, they are forced to live as servants. They are given a place, or not so much given as forced into a place, and there they shall remain. And then we see with the dear doctor, who is kind of sometimes a sympathetic character, but he ultimately reveals that he would rather be in this power structure, in this survivor hierarchy, than facing the wolves, the dead that roam the world, as he shows Beth when he opens that gate to show the things that he fears outside and the reason that he doesn't escape. And thus, even though Beth says that he's not part of the problem, he is perpetuating it, especially when he has her kill the other doctor on site so that he can secure his position of power, knowing that everyone must come to him for his services and no one else. He's kind of in a position, perhaps you could compare it to that of Eugene, who is being protected on all fronts by Abraham, Rosita, and now Maggie and Glenn as they join them in the thrust onward to DC. there's a lot of talk about whether Eugene is full of shiz or not. I think it's distinctly possible that the excuse, or the reasoning that he created for their needing to go to DC and the whole, I forget the way that he explained it, but you know the one. He gave just enough of an explanation to make people think that he's legit, and he can't really go into it because he's such a big and important guy, and he may as well save that for when he's in a position where he can enact change, but perhaps there's really nothing to it. There's certainly a lot about his character that is very shadowy in that respect, but I have to say that he reminded me a lot of Edwards in that way. If it is true, in fact, that that Eugene doesn't actually have the cure, you know. So while Edwards has some likable qualities, while he intercedes for Beth before Mr. Rape Cop can go forward with his sucker scheme, just deplorable on every level. There are parts of him, parts of his humanity that remain intact, but he gives into this system that gives him a place of security, no matter how damaging and crazy it is. And it's just so wild to think about how most of us probably side with Beth, who sees the outside as the best alternative to this situation. She is ready to bust out as soon as she possibly can. And she cannot explain to these people who have set up their camp here, set up this system, this institution, she cannot explain to them the freedom that comes with being on the move, the thing that Rick and his group have discovered. That you can't take shelter, because when people set up these kinds of shelters, there's a lot of potential for crazy making and things going horribly, ridiculously wrong and becoming institutionalized and systematized so that they are ingrained into everyone who's a part of the system. It's insane and gross and not good. And so, you know, whenever we find ourselves and our beloved characters trapped in four walls and a roof, we get antsy, which is quite ironic because you would think, well, they are sheltered from the undead, but how much worse are those guys, you know? Because while they have the potential to physically harm you, and by physically harming someone you love or yourself, cause emotional pain, etc., they're just feasting machines. There is nothing to it for them other than to consume. And they do so blindly because it is their nature, because their human nature has been removed. It's been removed. Ugh, I do not know where that came from. My tongue sometimes, it just does not want to function. But, whereas people have the capacity to enact so many different kinds of harm, as we all know in our day-to-day lives. And then, of course, we see people like Officer Gorman, who are abusers and rapists, and they are allowed to do whatever they so choose with the people that are brought into the system because they are the enforcers of the order that Dawn is trying to uphold. And ultimately, the only thing that matters is that they have some system in place for when they are rescued and rebuild the world. They think that they're laying the blueprints for a fresh society, but this society is built on garbage and rubbish and just absolutely disgusting, terrible abuses against humankind. And whenever Dawn confronts that, she reacts coldly or in physical violence, and it just perpetuates the abuse even more, which is what made this episode so incredibly tense, is that when people were not being physically harmed, they were about to. The only truly sympathetic character that we were introduced to this week was Noah, aka Chris from Everybody Hates Chris. I recognized that guy right away. My mom freaking loves that show. But, so it was nice to see a friendly face. Not nice to see him playing laundry boy in this madhouse. But he's got a solid head on his shoulders, and he makes for a very viable companion for Beth as they conspire how they're going to get out of this place. And it's interesting, too, how he speaks about the way that he was brought into this system, about how his father was strong and potentially belligerent, able to fight his way out. And while he was weaker, they don't know anything about him. The same things are assumed of Beth, and so they make a really great power team, and down the shaft into the heart of darkness they go. And it is just quite a riveting journey. And now we have to wait and see how exactly Daryl and Carol are going to become involved in the events that we saw here in this episode. But we can guess, and this is my personal theory, and that of many others, that Carol being brought in at the very end, right before Beth is supposedly going to lobotomize someone, I'm not sure, maybe the dear old doc whose motives she uncovers, but I don't think that Carol is, I think that it might be part of a ruse, that perhaps Noah escaped, met up with Carol and Daryl, explained what happened, and then maybe Carol is offering herself up to infiltrate this place, get a hold of Beth, get on out. That begs the question, who arrives back at the church at the end of last week's episode with Daryl? I am assuming that it's Noah and that currently the group is split, but I guess we're going to have to see, and in a couple weeks, because next week it's Abraham's turn to take the wheel. Anyways, I did start mentioning some of the potential parallels between Dawn and Rick, and Dawn and Abraham, and Dawn and the governor even, but I didn't really go into the stuff about her and Rick. And it's really disturbing to see how, you know, they were both cops, and sort of the directions that their journeys take. Like, what kind of survivor can thrive in this world, and to what extremes might Rick resort later on, because he is at this point very much the cynic, but having this family and this roving community doing everything they can to adapt to their environment, it's almost as if being free in that way has kept them sane. They're not attempting to put the world back together, and just moving forward with what they have is kind of their saving grace. That's kind of what's crazy about this show. Yeah, so I mean, please leave all of your thoughts in the comments. So much interesting and really intense and gritty stuff in this episode. Fantastic performances, really interesting setting. We got to see too the destroyed cityscape of Atlanta, and that not just urban decay, but urban decimation that we got to see when Beth and Stephen were out on the roof kind of talking about how this place got to where it was. And it's been a long time since we've really had that point of reference, because we've been in the trenches and the forests, kind of completely torn away from any semblance of former society, just camps and setups and things, and then we see this city that has been laid to waste. And so it was really cool to kind of have that new old context, because this is technically where the show began, so it's kind of nostalgic in that way, but then scary to see what is endured in this place that was thought to be a shelter for so many, and yet turned into one mass grave in the end. So who makes it out alive? Who gets back together? Is Abraham and his group gonna be able to move forward, or are we all gonna converge back in the middle, have another family shindig? I have no idea, but yeah, let me know what you guys thought about this episode. I'm gonna check my tweets and see if I had anything else interesting I missed. Oh, when one of the times when Dawn was confronting Beth and she pulled out her arm, were those cuts, the scars from when she cut herself in season 2? That's what I was thinking. But again, it just serves to show how far this character has come. It's absolutely crazy. Yeah, mostly my live tweeting fest was emotionally driven. That is for freaking sure. But I am just really, really grateful that we did not have to see a full-on rape scene with Officer Gorman, even though the thing with the sucker was rape enough for me. And I'm really glad that he was swiftly and brutally dealt with. Bye-bye, ain't gonna miss you. Yeah, but the tension is high. I don't like that we have to wait so long to see how this is resolved, but just a very, very different episode, and so exciting to see Beth's resilience and her absolute refusal to succumb to this system that this vortex that she's been sucked into, all of these power relationships that are masquerading as a semblance of society, and she breaks into it. She breaks it down for them pretty harsh, that nobody's coming to save them, and they're all gonna die, and they're pretty much making life worse for themselves until then. So again, it's wild to think about how the open road has become a place of comfort and sanctuary of sorts. Really the only thing you can have is people, and here in this institution there is no possibility for relationship. It's only this constant give and take and give and take. And violently do these people try to bring people back to life, only to kill them slowly, systematically, over time. That's not survival. That's not transcendence. You're kind of moving in the opposite direction there. Don't really care what you say, but I'm really excited to see how all of this unfolds, and yet another really riveting and fascinating change of pace in this season. So leave the rest of your thoughts below. Anything that I missed or failed to address, I would be happy to do in the comments with you guys. So like this video if you like it, subscribe if you want more television action. I will be back with Gotham very soon here. New shows on the horizon, new things, hopefully. I've been busy, but it's been a great season. Sundays, bloody Sundays, have not disappointed me so far. So thank you so much for watching. You guys take care, and I will be back before you know it.